But unreasonably, slumber did not come. He lay there, a thread of uneasiness cold within him, watching the red-hot underside of the bottom log in the fireplace. The fire had eaten much of its surface down to segmented coals that blushed, first bright, then dim, as small wandering airs in the room blew through, then passed on, while flame wraiths danced between them. Something, he told himself, was wrong. It was not just his imagination. Something was very wrong. First, there had been the change he had felt in the attitudes of his castle servants. That had been so even before the boom noises began. Then there had been Brian's too quick joining in the armed action against a chief counselor of the king, which could be read as against the king himself. This last apparently only because of Brian's great need for money. It was not at all like the Brian Jim had thought he knew. Brian was a chivalric idealist. He carried his passion to do what was right to almost ridiculous limits sometimes. Jim would have believed him willing to cut off his right hand, literally, before using it to draw a sword in any way that could be considered against the king. But Brian had embraced it almost joyfully. And now here was Jim himself, meekly allowing himself to be swept up in Chandos' expedition to counter the very movement that Brian had agreed to join. Jim was not fooled. He had not been dragooned into this business because of his powers as a magician, which were actually at little more than the beginner level, though non-magicians never seemed able to believe that. He was here because he was also popularly thought to be a paladin, a mighty warrior, and the truth was, he was even less of that than he was a magician. He had been in a few actual, if unimportant, medieval combats, usually beside Brian, but these had been the sort of encounter people like Brian all but sneered at, refusing to dignify them with any description more weighty than a brush, a bicker, or some small disturbance. Brian, who had worked hard to train him in the proper use of sword, dagger, and lance, knew better than to speak at all highly of Jim's fighting skills. Chandos, old in war and skilled at sizing up fighting men, must have recognized Jim's lack quickly. Just last Christmas, Sir Harrimore Killingsworth, Brian's chief rival with sword and lance, had seen through Jim at a glance, and had not hesitated to tell him so. That was what had started him examining his conscience. This was, in many ways, a cruel, primitive time, but he and Angie had made the decision to stay, after he had rescued her from the loathly tower, when for a short while he had owned the magic energy needed to take them home to their own time and world. They had agreed that when all was said and done, they liked it here. It was a time to be alive in many ways a noble time when courage and loyalty to principles were acknowledged and respected above the place they had in the minds of the 20th century. Still remembering the moment of that decision, he smiled, and smiling, drifted off to sleep, thinking about what had led up to it. He woke again suddenly. Someone was standing over him, but it was not Angie. It was Carolinus, his master in magic, firelight making shadows from his wispy beard on the red robe that he always wore.
"Well, well," said the mage in a notably hoarse voice. "Awake now, are we?